All right. It is the 14th of August, 2021. I'm reading a book here. It's called The Saga of Gösta Berling. This is a translation published by Penguin Classics of a book written by Selma Lagerlöf that takes place in the province of Värmland. And I just found a little information about the background of this book. It's the first novel that Selma Lagerlöf published in 1891, and it takes place in Värmland, where our ancestors are from, in the 1820s. And let's see. It says here, in Gösta Berling, Lagerlöf is a romanticist and represents a reaction against the realism that prevailed at the time. As a child, she had absorbed the folk tales of her surroundings, and later in life, it occurred to her like a lightning flash that it was her particular mission to give these stories expression. Gösta Berling's saga has been called the prose epic of Swedish country life. The scene is set on the shores of Lake Fryken. That's the long lake that is in the center of Värmland. And then our family came from one end or beyond the one end of this long lake. The lake is called Löven in the book. Using wolves, snow, supernatural elements, and eccentric upper-class characters to project an exotic image of 1820s Värmland, the novel can be compared to magic realism. That's a movement or a school within literature, magic realism. The title is meant to give associations to the Icelandic sagas. The first sentence, finally the vicar was in the pulpit, is one of the most famous in Swedish literature. A quick summary of the plot is that there is a hero whose name is Gösta Berling. He's a defrocked Lutheran priest who has been saved by the mistress of Ekeby from freezing to death in a snowdrift, and thereupon becomes one of her pensioners in the manor at Ekeby. And so the other retired people living in her manor at Ekeby seem to be veterans of the, what do you call that guy? Little short Frenchman. Napoleon. There were the Napoleonic Wars, and then these were old guys who had been through the Napoleonic Wars. Maybe they got a pension from the military, and then they were living together with the the wife of the master of Ekeby. So she was called the mistress of Ekeby. Now you might wonder why he was defrocked, and it turned out he was drinking. He was missing services because of his drinking, and the people in the congregation forgave him, but even so, he thought that he couldn't continue, and so he fled. And then he was depressed, and he ended up in that snowdrift where the mistress of Ekeby was able to save him. Now, the pensioners who are living there at the the farm or the manor house, they finally get some power by making a deal with this shady character called Sintram, and then they manage the property as they see fit, and their lives are filled with many wild adventures. And so the stories are these adventures of the cavaliers, the horsemen from Napoleon, going through Värmland. Gösta Berling is their leading spirit. He's a poet in his personality and the charming personality among the band of merry men. Before the story ends, Gösta Berling is redeemed, and even the old mistress of Ekeby is permitted to come home to her old home to die. All right, the main characters, and we were talking about this, Mom. The main characters, of course, the first character is Gösta Berling, defrocked minister. Then there is the major's wife, the mistress of Ekeby. Her name is Margreta Samzelius, and her maiden name was Margareta Selsing. She's in charge of Ekeby, and she gives the cavaliers a place to stay. Maybe she takes some money from them, provides them a place to live, and also arranges some food sometimes, right? And they come to her grand balls when she holds a grand ball. There's another one of the property owners around there in Värmland. His name is Sintram. He owns some of the iron mills where they're processing iron and hammering it out into things. Here they call him the evil one who only causes mischief. Then there is Marianne Sinclair, an actress, and she is thrown out of her house for kissing Gösta. There's also Countess Elizabeth, Elizabeth Karl's daughter, from Italy. She is married to Count Henrik Dona. There's also Anna Stjernhök. She's engaged to a minor character, and at one time she loves Gösta. We all love Gösta. There's also Countess Marta, who is the mother of Henrik, stepmother of Ebba. She is rich and haughty. There's also Count Henrik Dona, Elizabeth's husband, known for being stupid. There is Ebba Dona, Marta's stepdaughter, extremely religious, and Gösta's first love. And then there are the 12 cavaliers: Gösta Berling, Colonel Behrenkreutz, Major Anders Fuchs, Little Ruster, Rutger von Orneklau, Christian Berg, the giant, their squire Julius, Kuvenhuller, cousin Christopher, Uncle Eberhard, Lovenberg, and Liljekrona. All right, now we're going to jump back in. We've actually read the introduction and the first 5 chapters, and then we even got into chapter 6. And I thought what I would do is to start in again in chapter 6. So this is starting with, a little review or repetition is always good. I've got my reading glasses on here so I can see things very sharply. And then we're ready to go with chapter 6. And of course, the beginning of this is going to be a repetition of what we read before, but then we'll get into the new material. Then we'll continue with the rest of the book. Okay, the ball at Ekeby. O women of bygone ages, to speak of you is like speaking of heaven. You were pure beauty, pure light, eternally youthful, eternally lovely, and tender as a mother's eyes when she looks down at her child. Soft as young squirrels, you curled around a man's neck. Never did your voices quiver with rage. Never did your brows furrow. Never did your gentle hands become rough and hard. Sweet Vestals, you stood like jeweled images in the temple of the home. You know who I think the poet is? I think that's Selma Lagerlöf herself. Incense and prayers were offered to you, though you love performed its miracles, and poetry affixed a gold-gleaming halo around your head. O women of bygone ages, this is the story of how yet another one of you gave Gösta Berling your love. A fortnight after the ball at Borg, there was a party at Ekeby. What a party it was! Old men and women would turn young again, smiling and happy, if they as much as spoke of it. But no wonder, for at that time the Cavaliers were sole masters of Ekeby. That's because they made that deal with Sintram. The majoress was wandering around the countryside with the beggar's purse and cane. They threw her out and took over. And the major was living at Frö, so he moved away. He could not even be present at the party because smallpox had broken out at Frö, and he was afraid of spreading the contagion further. What a wealth of enjoyment was packed into those 12 sweet hours, starting with the popping of the cork of the first wine bottle at the dinner table, up to the final stroke of the fiddle, when midnight had long since passed. Down they sank into the abyss of time, those spangled hours, enchanted by fiery wine, by the most luscious food, by the grandest music, by the cleverest plays, and by the loveliest tableau. Down they sank, dizzy from the most delirious dance. Where else could be found such smooth floors, such courtly cavaliers, and such beautiful women? O women of bygone ages, well you understood how to brighten up a ball. Currents of fire, of genius, and youthful energy coursed through anyone who approached you. It was worth the effort to squander your gold on the wax candles that would light up your fairness, on the wine that fostered the merriment in your hearts. For your sake it was worth the effort to dance the soles of your shoes to dust and wear out the arm that wielded the fiddle bow. O women of bygone ages, it was you who held the key to the gate of paradise. The halls of Ekeby are swarming with the sweetest of your sweet company. There is the young Countess Dona, sparklingly happy and desirous of play and dance, as befits her 20 years. And there are the beautiful daughters of the judge at Munkerud, and the happy missus of Berga. There is Anna Sternhök, 1,000 times more beautiful than before, in the tender melancholy that has come over her ever since that night when she was pursued by the wolves, locked out of her own house, wearing only silk slippers in the snow. Oh, that was a lonely night when she was chased by the wolves. There are many more as well, who are not yet forgotten, I suppose, but soon will be. And there is also the beautiful Marianne Sinclair. She, the celebrated one, who had shone at the king's court, glistened in the castles of counts, the queen of beauty, who has traveled around the countryside and received homage everywhere. She, who struck the spark of love wherever she appeared, had condescended to come to the cavalier's ball. At that time, the honor of the province of Värmland was held high, borne by many proud names. The happy children of that beautiful land had much to be proud of, but when they mentioned their glorious ones, they never neglected to mention Marianne Sinclair. The saga of her conquests filled the land. There was talk of the crowns of counts that had hovered over her head, of the millions that had been laid at her feet, of the warriors' swords and poets' wreaths, whose brilliance enticed her. And not only was she beautiful, she was brilliant and erudite. The best men of the day were happy to converse with her. She herself was not an author, but many of her ideas, the seeds of which she planted in the souls of her poetic friends, came alive in verse. Sorry, I just need to open up the book a little bit, break the back of the book. There we go. She seldom remained for long in Värmland, in bear country. Her life was spent in constant travel. Her father, the wealthy Melker Sinclair, sat at home at Björne with his wife, allowing Marianne to travel to her distinguished friends in the great cities or at the grand estates. His enjoyment was in telling about all the money she spent, and both of the old people lived happily in the sheen of Marianne's radiant existence. Her life was a life of amusements and applause. The air around her was love. Love was her light and lantern, love her daily bread. She herself had often loved, often, but never had such a fire of desire lasted long enough so that the shackles that bind her life could be forged. She's a free spirit. I'm waiting for him, the strong one, who will take me by storm, she used to say about love. Until now, he hasn't climbed over any walls or swum across any moats. He has come tamely, without wildness in his gaze and madness in his heart. I await the mighty one who will carry me out of myself. I want to know love so strong within me that I tremble at the thought of him. Now I only feel the kind of love at which my prudence smiles. Her presence gave fire to the conversation and life to the wine. Her glowing soul raised the tempo in the fiddle bows, and the dance floated in sweeter delirium than before. Across the boards she touched with her dainty foot. She was radiant at the tableau. She brought genius to the comedies, and her lovely lips. Oh, hush, it wasn't her fault. It was never her intention. It was the balcony. It was the moonlight. It was the lace veil, the knight's attire, the song that were to blame. These poor young people were innocent. All this that led to so much misfortune was done, however, with the best of intentions. Squire Julius, who was knowledgeable about everything, had arranged a tableau only so that Marianne could shine in all of her brilliance. In the theater that was set up in the large salon at Ekeby. The 100 guests sat watching the yellow moon of Spain wander across the dark night sky on the stage. A Don Juan came stealthily along the street in Seville and stopped under an ivy-clad balcony. He was disguised as a monk, though an embroidered cuff could be seen sticking out under his sleeve, and the point of a shining rapier under the hem of his robe. The disguised one raised his voice in song. The mouth of no girl do I kiss, nor raise my lips to goblet's rim, a foaming glass of wine. A cheek whose skin, a pale caress, a glance from me has set on fire. Such looks do not my heart inspire, a gaze in search of mine. Come not to the gated window, come not to the grated window, Signora, with your beauty fair. Away from you I shrink, a rosary and cowl to show my heart is in the Virgin's care, and water, should the fever flare, my one consoling drink. When he fell silent, Marianne came out on the balcony, dressed in black velvet and a lace veil. She leaned out over the railing and sang slowly and ironically, "Why do you tarry, pious man, at midnight at my balcony? Do you pray for my soul?" But then suddenly, warmly and lively, "No, quickly flee, someone may come. Your rapier, oh, sorry. No, quickly flee, someone may come. Your rapier will be seen before long. They hear, despite all sacred song, spurs jingling at your heels." At these words, the monk threw off his disguise, and Gösta Berling stood under the balcony in a silk and gold knight's costume. He did not heed the beauty's warning, but on the contrary, he climbed up one of the balcony posts, swung himself over the balustrade, and just as Squire Julius had arranged it, he fell to his knees at the feet of the lovely Marianne. She smiled fetchingly at him as she extended her hand for him to kiss, and while the two young people were looking at each other, absorbed in love, the curtain fell. Oh, it warms my heart. And before her was Gösta Berling, his face pliant as a poet's and bold as a commander's, with deep eyes glistening with roguishness and genius that begged and coaxed. He was lithe and powerful, fiery and captivating. Well, the curtain went up and down. The two young people remained standing in the same position. Gösta's eyes held fast the beautiful Marianne. They begged, they coaxed. The applause died out, and the curtain remained still. No one could see them. Then the beautiful Marianne leaned down and kissed Gösta Berling. She didn't know why. She just had to. He extended his arms around her head and held her tight. She kissed him again and again. But it was the balcony, it was the moonlight, it was the lace veil, the knight's costume, the song, the applause, that were all to blame. These poor young people were innocent. They hadn't wished for this, nor had she turned down the noble crowns which had hovered over her head and left behind the millions that had lain at her feet out of longing for Gösta Berling. Nor had he already forgotten Anna Stjernhök. No, they were without guilt. Neither of them had wished for this. It was gentle Löwenborg, with a tear in his eye and a smile on his lips, who was the curtain puller that day. Distracted by many sorrowful memories, he took scarce notice of the things of this world and had never learned to manage them properly. When he saw that Gösta and Marianne had taken a new position, he believed that this too was part of the tableau, part of the play, and so he began to pull on the curtain rope. The young people on the balcony noticed nothing until the storm of applause again came thundering toward them. Marianne gave a start and tried to flee, but Gösta held her fast, whispering, "Be still now. They think that this is part of the play." He felt how her body shuddered and how the fervor of the kisses died out on her lips. "Don't be afraid," he whispered. "Lovely lips have the right to kiss." They had to remain standing while the curtain went up and down, and each time 100 pairs of eyes saw them. Just as many hands thundered forth to storm a storm. Just as many hands thundered forth a storm of applause. For it is lovely to see two beautiful young people portraying the happiness of love. No one could believe that these kisses were anything other than theatrical illusion. No one suspected that the signora was trembling with shame in the night from worry. No one could believe that the whole thing wasn't part of the tableau of the play. Finally, Marianne and Gösta were standing behind the stage. She drew her hand across her forehead toward the hairline. "I don't understand myself," she said. "For shame, Miss Marianne," he said, grimacing and throwing out his hands. "Kissing Gösta Berling? For shame!" Marianne had to laugh. "Everyone knows that Gösta Berling is irresistible. My mistake is no greater than others." And they agreed, in perfect accord, to put on a good face so that no one could suspect the truth. "Can I be sure that the truth will never come out, Gösta?" she asked, as they were about to join the audience. "That you can, Miss Marianne. The cavaliers can keep quiet. I can speak for them." She closed her eyes, and a peculiar smile crossed her lips. "If the truth comes out anyway, what would people think of me, Gösta?" "They wouldn't think anything, because they would know that this means nothing. They would think that we were in character and simply kept on acting." Yet another question came stealthily out from under the lowered eyelids, under the assumed smile. "But you yourself, Gösta, what do you think about this?" "I think that Miss Marianne is in love with me," he joked. "Don't believe such a thing," she smiled, "or I will have to stab you with this Spanish dagger of mine to show that you are wrong, sir." "Women's kisses are costly," said Gösta. "Is my life the price for kissing Miss Marianne?" Then from Marianne's eyes came a glance flashing at him, so sharp that it felt like a slap. "I want to see you dead, Gösta Berling. Dead, dead." These words ignited an old longing in the poet's blood. "Alas," he said, "would that these words were more than words, that they were arrows that came whirring from a dark thicket, that they were a dagger or poison that had the power to destroy this wretched body as well as grant my soul freedom." She was again calm and smiling. "Childishness," she said, taking his arm to make their way out among the guests. They kept their costumes on, and the triumphs were renewed when they showed themselves outside the stage. Everyone praised them. No one suspected a thing. The ball began again, but Gösta fled from the ballroom. His heart smarted after Marianne's glance, as if it had been wounded by sharp steel. He understood the meaning of her words well enough. It was shameful to love him. It was shameful to be loved by him. A shame worse than death. You know, he's a defrocked minister, disgraced, known to be an alcoholic, but recovering. Bad guy. He would never dance again. He never wanted to see them again, these beautiful women. He knew it well enough. Those lovely eyes, those red cheeks did not blaze for him. Nor for him did those light feet hover, subdued laughter ring. Nor for him did those light feet hover, or subdued laughter ring. Yes, dance with him, feel passionate about him, that they could do, but none of them would have seriously wanted to become his. The poet made his way into the smoking room with the older gentleman and took a seat at one of the gaming tables. He happened to sit down at the table where the mighty master of Björne, that must be an estate or a farm called Björne, was playing knack. It must be a card game called knack, alternating with Russian Bank, another card game, and gathering a tall pile of coins in front of him. The stakes were already high. Now Gösta's arrival made them even higher. Green banknotes were brought out, and the pile of money in front of mighty Melchior Sinclair steadily kept on growing. But the coins and banknotes were accumulating in front of Gösta as well, and soon he was the only one holding out in the battle against the great iron magnate at Björne. You know, they made iron in Värmland, And so we have an iron magnate here. Soon even that large pile of money made its way from Melchior Sinclair over to Gösta Berling. They had iron mines, you know. Then they'd go into the woods and they would take down the trees and use them to make charcoal. And then the farmers could sell the charcoal to the guys who were processing iron and then make a little money, you know. And they'd sell cheese and make money from that. They'd sell some hay and milk and eggs and whatever, you know. Anything you could do to get by in those days when you were a farmer in Värmland. But this is the iron magnate who's playing cards. Gösta, my boy, the mill owner, shouted with laughter as he gambled away everything that was in his wallet and in his purse. What should we do now? I'm broke, and I never gamble with borrowed money. I promised my mother that. He found a way, however. He gambled away his watch and his beaver fur coat, and was just about to wager his horse and sleigh when Sintram stopped him. Wager something to win on, the evil master of force advised him. You know, Sintram, he's a mill owner too, and he's a mill owner at the rapids on the river. That's called Force. That's the name of the rapids in Swedish. So Sintram, maybe he's a metaphor for the devil, but anyway, Sintram, he says, wager something that can change your bad luck. Heaven knows what I will come up with then, he says. Play for what's dearest to your heart, Melchior. Play for your daughter. You can safely venture that, squire, said Gösta with a laugh. I would never bring home those winnings. The mighty Melchior could do nothing but laugh himself. He was averse to having Marianne's name brought up at the gaming table, but this was so utterly insane that he couldn't get angry. Gamble away Marianne to Gösta, sure, he could gladly venture that. That is to say, he explained, that if you can win her consent, Gösta, you see, he's just the father. It's really the daughter who has to decide this. But he says, if she's along with it, Gösta, then I'll wager my blessing on the marriage. I'll wager my blessing of the marriage on this card here. Gösta wagered all of his winnings, and the play began. He won, and iron magnate Sinclair stopped playing. He realized that he couldn't fight with bad luck. The night proceeded onward. Midnight had passed. The cheeks of lovely women started to turn pale. Their curls unwind. Their flounces wrinkle. The old ladies rose from their sofas and said that since the ball had now lasted for 12 hours, it might be time for them to head home. And the lovely party should be over. But then Lillekrona, he's one of the cavaliers, Lillekrona himself took hold of the fiddle and started playing the final polska. There must be some kind of music that you play with a fiddle. The horses were waiting by the gate. The old wives were putting on their furs and bonnets. The old gentlemen wound their travel sashes and buttoned their overshoes. But the young people could not tear themselves away from the dance. They were dancing in their coats. They were dancing every kind of polska. The dancing was frantic. As soon as a lady was abandoned by a cavalier, another one came and carried her off with him. And even the melancholy Gösta Berling was pulled into the whirl. He would dance away the sorrow and humiliation. He wanted to have a delirious lust for life in his blood again. He wanted to be happy, he, like everyone else. And he danced so that the walls of the room were spinning and his mind was whirling. So, what sort of lady was it he'd carried off with him in the midst of the flock? She was light and lithe, and he knew that currents of fire were passing between him and her. Oh, Marianne. While Gösta was dancing with Marianne, Sintram was already in his sleigh down in the yard, and next to him stood Melchior Sinclair. The great mill owner was impatient at being forced to wait for Marianne, his daughter. He stamped in the snow in his large overshoes, patting his arms against the bitter cold. Perhaps you shouldn't have gambled away Marianne to Gösta, Sinclair, said Sintram. What did you say? Sintram put the reins in order and lifted his whip before he replied. I said That kissing wasn't part of the play. The mighty iron magnate raised his arm for a death blow, but Sintram was already gone. He drove, whipping the horse to a furious speed without daring to look back, because Melchior Sinclair had a heavy hand and little patience. The mill owner at Bjorna went into the ballroom to look for his daughter, and saw then how Gösta and Marianne were dancing. The final polska appeared wild and delirious. Some couples were pale, others were fiery red. The dust was like smoke in the hall, the wax candles glowing, burned down to the holders. And in the midst of this ghostly destruction, Gösta and Marianne were flying along, royal in their inexhaustible strength, their beauty flawless, happy to abandon themselves to glorious motion. Melchior Sinclair watched them for a while, but then he left and let Marianne dance. He slammed the door hard, stamped dreadfully in the stairway, and without further ado sat down in the sleigh, where his wife was already waiting, and he drove home. When Marianne finished dancing and asked about her parents, they were gone. When she knew this for certain, she, however, showed no surprise. She got dressed silently and went out into the yard. The women in the dressing room thought that she was driving in her own sleigh. But she hurried in her thin silk shoes along the road without speaking to anyone about her distress. In the darkness, no one recognized her as she walked along the side of the road. No one could believe that this late-night wanderer, who was driven up into the snowdrifts by sleighs hurrying past, was the beautiful Marianne. When she could safely be in the middle of the road, she began to run. She ran as long as she was able, and then she walked, and then she ran again. An appalling, tormenting anxiety was driving her. From Ekeby to Bjorna, it can't be farther than at most about 1.5 miles. These are Swedish miles, so that means it's about 15 kilometers, which means, what is that in English miles? That must be divide by 5 and multiply by 3 makes it 9 miles. So she's got 9 miles to go here. Marianne was soon home. That's not a short distance, you know. But she almost believed that she'd gone the wrong way. Boy, she must be tired. Staying up all night dancing, and then a long trip home. As she was approaching the yard, all the doors were closed, all the lights extinguished. Perhaps her parents hadn't arrived. She went up and knocked a few times heavily on the entry door. She took hold of the door handle and shook it so that it reverberated throughout the house. No one came and opened. But as she was going to release the door handle, the iron, which she had taken a hold of with her bare hands, the frozen skin was torn from her hand. Oh, it's cold up there in Värmland. The great iron magnate Melchior Sinclair had gone home to close the gates of Bjorna to his only child. He was intoxicated from much drinking, and he was wild with rage. He hated his daughter because she liked Gösta Berling. Now he locked the servants in the kitchen and his wife in the bedroom. With solemn oaths, he promised them that he would beat senseless anyone who tried to let Marianne in. They knew well enough that he would keep his word. No one had ever seen him so angry. No greater sorrow had ever befallen him. If his daughter had appeared before him, perhaps he would have killed her. He had given her golden jewelry and silk clothes. He had had a fine sensibility and book learning inculcated in her. She had been his pride and his honor. He had been as proud of her as if she wore a crown. Oh, his queen, his goddess, his celebrated, lovely, proud Marianne. Had he spared anything for her? Had he not considered himself purely too simple to be her father? Oh, Marianne, Marianne, should he not hate her when she is in love with Gösta Berling and kisses him? Should he not reject her and close his door to her when she wants to disgrace her loftiness by loving such a man? Let her stay at Ekeby. Let her run to the neighbors to find lodging for the night. Let her sleep in the snowdrifts. It's all the same. She is already dragged in the filth, the lovely Marianne. Her sheen is gone. The sheen of her life is gone. He is lying in his bed in there and hears how she is pounding on the outside door. What is that to him? He is sleeping. Out there stands the one who wants to marry a defrocked minister. He has no home for such a one. If he had loved her less, if he had been less proud of her, then he might have let her in. Well, he couldn't deny them his blessing. He'd gambled that away. But open his door to her, that he would not do. Oh, Marianne. The beautiful young woman was still standing outside the door of her home. By turns, she shook the lock in impotent rage. By turns, she fell to her knees, folding her wounded hands and praying for forgiveness. But no one heard her, and no one answered, and no one opened. Oh, wasn't this dreadful? I am seized with alarm when I tell it. She returned from a ball where she had been the queen. She had been proud, rich, happy, and within a moment she was cast into such bottomless misery. Locked out of her home, abandoned to the cold, not scorned, not beaten, not cursed, simply locked out, with cold, implacable lack of feeling. I think about the cold, starry night that arched over and around her, the great expansive night with the empty, deserted fields of snow, with the silent forests. Everything was sleeping, everything sunk into painless sleep. There was only one living point in all of this slumbering whiteness. All the sorrow and anxiety and terror which is otherwise doled out across the world was creeping along slowly to this one lonely point. O God, to suffer alone in the midst of this sleeping, iced-over world. For the first time in her life, she encountered mercilessness and hardness. Her mother didn't care to leave her bed to save her. Old servants who had guided her first steps heard her and didn't move a muscle for her sake. For what crime was she being punished? Where could she expect compassion, if not here, at this door? If she had murdered, she would still have knocked on it, believing that those inside would have forgiven her. If she had degenerated into the most wretched of creatures and come devastated and in rags, she would still have gone confidently up to this door and expected a loving welcome. This door was the entrance to her home. Behind it, she could only encounter love. Had her father not tested her enough now? Wouldn't they soon open the door? Father, father, she cried, let me come in. I'm freezing. I'm shaking. It's terrible out here. Mother, mother, you who have taken so many steps to serve me, you who have watched over me so many nights, why are you sleeping just now? Mother, mother, watch again this one night, and I will never more cause you sorrow. She cries out and then sinks into breathless silence to listen for a reply. But no one heard her, no one obeyed her, and no one answered. Then she wrings her hands in anguish, but her eyes have no tears. The long dark house with its locked doors and unlit windows is eerily unmoving in the night. What would become of her now when she was homeless? She was branded and disgraced as long as the sky arched over her, and her father himself was pressing a red-hot iron down into her shoulder. Father, she calls yet again, what will become of me? People will believe everything bad about me. She wept in agony, and her body was stiff with cold. Woe that such misery could descend on one who recently stood so high. That it is so easy to be transported into the deepest misery. Why shouldn't we be anxious about life? Who is sailing in a secure vessel? Around about us, sorrow swells like a churning sea. See the waves hungrily licking the sides of the ship. See them rush up to board. Oh, no safe redoubt, no solid ground, no secure vessel. As far as the eye can see, only an unknown sky over an ocean of sorrow. But hush. Finally, quiet steps are coming through the entry hall. Is it you, mother? Asked Marianne. Yes, my child. May I come in now? Father doesn't want to let you come in. I've run through the snowdrifts in my thin shoes from Ekeby. I've been standing here an hour, pounding and calling. I'm freezing to death out here. Why did you leave without me? My child, why did you kiss Gösta Berling? But tell father then. It doesn't mean I like him. It was a game. Does he think I want Gösta to be mine? Go to the foreman's quarters, Marianne, and ask if you can stay there tonight. Father is drunk. Father won't listen to reason. He's held me prisoner up there. I slipped out when I thought he was sleeping. He'll kill you if you come in. Mother, should I go to strangers when I have a home? Are you as hard-hearted as father? How can you let this happen, that I'm locked out? I'll lie down in the snowdrift outside here if you don't let me in, mother. Then Marianne's mother placed her hand on the door handle to open it, but at the same moment heavy steps were heard in the attic stairwell, and a harsh voice was calling her. Marianne listened. Her mother hurried away. The harsh voice cursed her, and then Marianne heard something dreadful. She could hear every sound from the silent house. She heard the thud of a blow, of the rap of a cane or a box on the ears. Then she detected a faint racket, and then once again a blow. He was beating her mother. The terrifying, the gigantic Melchior Sinclair was beating his wife. And in wan dismay, Marianne, writhing with anxiety, threw herself down on the doorway. Now she was crying, and her tears froze to ice on the threshold of her home. Oh, mercy, pity, open, so that her own back might bend under the blows. Oh, how could he beat mother, beat her because she didn't want to see her daughter dead in the snowdrift the next day, because she wanted to console her child. That night a great humiliation fell onto Marianne. She had dreamed that she was a queen, and there she lay, hardly better than a whipped thrall. But she got up in cold rage. Once again she struck her bloody hand against the door and called, "Hear what I'm telling you, you who are beating mother. You will weep, Melchior Sinclair, weep." Thereupon the lovely Marianne went and laid herself to rest in the snowdrift. She threw off her fur and lay on her black velvet dress, easily discernible against the white snow. She lay there and thought about how her father would come out the next day on his early morning walk and find her there. She wished this, only this, that he himself might find her. O death, pale friend, is it not as true as it is consoling that I can never avoid meeting you? Even to me, the dullest of the world's workers, you will come. Loosen the worn leather shoe from my foot. Tug the whisk and the milk pail from my hand. Remove the work clothes from my body. With gentle force you stretch me out. On a lace-adorned bed you adorn me with draping full-length linens. My feet no longer need shoes, but my hands are covered with snow-white gloves that no tasks will soil. Sanctified by you to the sweetness of rest, I sleep 1,000-year sleep. O Redeemer, the dullest of the world's workers am I, and I dream with a shiver of pleasure of that moment when I will be taken up to your kingdom. Pale friend, you may freely exercise your force against me, but I will tell you this, your struggle was harder with the women of bygone ages. The power of life was strong in their slender bodies. No cold could cool their hot blood. You have lain the lovely Marianne on your bed, O death, and you sat by her side as an old nurse sits by the cradle to rock the baby to sleep. You faithful old nurse, who knows what is good for human children, how it must annoy you when playmates come who waken your sleeping child with noise and commotion. How angry you must have been when the cavaliers lifted the lovely Marianne from the bed, when a man placed her against his chest, and warm tears fell from his eyes down onto her face. At Ekeby all the lights were out and all the guests had gone. The cavaliers stood alone in the cavaliers' wing around the final half-emptied bowl. Then Gösta tapped on the edges of the bowl and gave a speech. For you, women of bygone ages. To speak of you, he said, would be like speaking of heaven. You were pure fairness, pure light, eternally youthful, eternally lovely and tender as a mother's eyes when she looks down at her child. Soft as young squirrels, you curled around a man's neck. Never was your voice heard quivering with rage. Never did your brow furrow, never did your gentle hand become rough and hard. Sweet Vestals, you stood like jeweled images in the temple of the home. Incense and prayers were offered to you. Through you, love performed its miracles, and poetry affixed a gold-gleaming halo around your head. And the cavaliers leaped up, dizzy with wine, dizzy from his words, their blood rushing in festive joy. Old Uncle Eberhard, with lazy cousin Christopher, did not stay out of the game. With blazing speed, the cavaliers harnessed the horses to sledge and sleigh, and hurried out into the night, into the cold night, and gave homage once again to those who are never honored enough, to sing a serenade to each one of them, with the rosy cheeks and the clear eyes that so recently shone in the broad halls of Ekeby. O women of bygone ages, how it must have pleased you as you journeyed into the sweet heaven of dreams, to be wakened by a serenade from the most faithful of your knights. Well must it please you, as it well pleases a departed soul to be wakened by the sweet music of the heavens. But the cavaliers did not get far on this pious crusade, for as soon as they had come to Björna, they found the beautiful Marianne lying in the drift, just by the gateway to her home. They shook with wrath upon seeing her there. It was like finding a venerated saint lying mutilated and plundered outside the gate of a church. Gösta shook his clenched fist toward the dark house. You children of hatred, he shouted, you hailstorms, you northern storms, you devastators of God's paradise. The cavalier Berenkreutz lit his horn lantern and shone it down into the pale blue face. Then the cavaliers saw Marianne's wounded hands and the tears that had frozen to ice on her eyelashes, and they wailed like women, for she was not only a sacred icon, but a beautiful woman who had been a source of joy for old hearts. Gösta Berling fell down on his knees beside her. Now here she lies, my bride, he said. She gave me the bridal kiss a few hours ago, and her father has promised me his blessing. She lies waiting for me to come and share her white bed. And Gösta lifted the lifeless one up in his strong arms. Let us take her home to Ekeby, he cried. Now she's mine. I've found her here in the snowdrift. Now no one shall take her from me. We won't waken these people inside there. What would she do there within those doors, against which she has struck her hand bloody? He was allowed to do as he wished. He set Marianne down into the first sleigh and sat down by her side. Berenkreutz positioned himself beside and took the reins. He sat Marianne down into the first sleigh and sat down by her side. Berenkreutz positioned himself behind and took the reins. Rub her with snow, Gösta, he ordered. The cold had paralyzed her limbs, but no more than that. Her wildly agitated heart was still beating. She had not even lost consciousness. She was aware of everything about the cavaliers and how they had found her, but she could not move. So she was lying stiff and rigid in the sleigh, while Gösta Berling rubbed her with snow and alternately wept and kissed her, and she felt an overwhelming desire to be able simply to raise her hand enough that she could return a caress. She remembered everything. Lying there stiff and unmoving, she thought clearly like never before. Was she in love with Gösta Berling? Yes, she was. Was that simply a fancy for an evening? No, it had existed a long time, for many years. She compared herself to him and the other people in Vermland. They were all as spontaneous as children. Whatever desire moved them, they followed. They lived only the outer life, had never investigated the depths of their souls. But she had become the sort of person one becomes by traveling out among people. She could never abandon herself completely to anything. When she loved, or whatever she did, it was as though half of herself stood and looked on with a cold sneer. She had longed for a passion to come and pull her along with it in wild recklessness, and now she had arrived, and now he had arrived, the mighty one. As she kissed Gösta Berling on the balcony, then for the first time she had forgotten herself. And now the passion came again over her. Her heart was beating so that she could hear it. Would she not soon be master of her limbs? She felt a wild joy at being shut out of her home. Now she could be Gösta's without hesitation. How silly she'd been, having suppressed her love for so many years. Oh, it's grand to yield to love. But would she ever be free of these chains of ice? She had been ice on the inside and fire on the surface. Now it was the other way around. A soul of fire in a body of ice. Then Gösta feels how two arms slowly rise up around his neck in a weak, powerless embrace. He barely felt it, but Marianne thought that in her suffocating embrace she had given expression to the bound-up passion inside her. And when Baron Kreutz saw this, he let the horse run as it liked along the familiar road. He raised his gaze and peered stubbornly and unceasingly at the 7 sisters. Wow, that was a chapter. Do you know who the 7 sisters are? They're one of the constellations. If I'm not mistaken, that's the constellation that they use for the make of car, the Subaru. That's named after the 7 sisters. I'll have to look that up. All right, that was chapter 6, and as soon as possible, we'll be back with chapter 7 of the Saga of Gösta Berling. Boy, that was a story. Selma Lagerlöf is a wonderful storyteller. This is the book. Penguin Classics. All right, bye for now.